Okay, today we are picking up with the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was started by Octavian, who was a member of the Second Triumvirate, who takes over after a civil war. So the Roman Empire, this time period is often called Pax Romana because, well, that's Latin for the long peace. The Roman Empire, starting with Octavian, is going to usher in 200 years of peace, or mostly peace. And so it's kind of seen as sort of the grand era of the Romans, of what they can aspire to. And so we have Octavian Augustus, who is the revered one, and that's what Augustus means, that you're going to exalt him or revere him, that he is higher than others. So Octavian Augustus is going to enter into power, and he is going to take that power and do a lot of reforming of the Romans. One thing he's going to look at is social legislation, that there's going to be a series of laws that are passed to help society stop moral decline, that there was just too much greed, too much hunger and lust and all that kind of stuff. So basically he's going to make laws that say that luxury is out and simplicity is in, that you want to live a simpler life, that is better. And so he's going to pass something called sumptuary laws, and sumptuary laws regulate your expenses, of how much money you can spend on things. That there was only so much money that you should spend on clothing, and so much you should spend on housing, and so much you should spend on food and entertainment. Adultery is going to become a criminal offense, and adultery is where you sleep with someone outside of marriage. There will be penalties for bachelors and widowers and small families, which means three children, because there was a decline in the upper classes. People weren't having as many children, or if you refuse to get married, or your wife dies and you don't marry again, that was considered wrong, because they wanted to build up that upper class, because the poor people weren't following that. They got married and had babies all the time. So the poorer classes were increasing dramatically while the upper classes were not, and that was kind of scary for the upper classes. So he's going to have penalties if you didn't try and produce more children. And so you were usually fined if you did not comply with that. If you were a non-compliant, then you got extra taxes or extra fines that you had to pay. So Augustus is Rome, and we're talking about the city of Rome in this case. His Rome was very cosmopolitan, which means that it was very worldly. It had ethnic sections within it, kind of like if you think New York City today, where you have the Jewish section, and you have the Hispanic, and you have the Italian, and you have the African American section. Like, it's you have these ethnic sections that Little Russia, Little Tokyo, all those kinds of things that you can go to. So it's very similar to that. But it was also very overcrowded, it was also very noisy, and it was very dangerous as well. No traffic was allowed during the day in terms of wheeled traffic, like carriages and carts, because it just was too congested and people got hurt. So carts and carriages, things with wheels, could only come in during the nighttime hours. So it was a way to protect the people. They also had a police force that would roam through Rome and try to protect the people as well. There was also this feeling for Augustus of this responsibility to the poor, that you had to take care of them, or at least make their lives more enjoyable. So food and entertainment will be provided to divert the masses and get them thinking good things about the government as opposed to bad things and wanting to revolt. There will be over 100 public or religious holidays, so days that you don't have to work. So 100, like a third of the year, you would not have to work. He creates the Circus Maximus, which is an arena for horse and chariot races, and it's actually Rome's oldest and largest outdoor arena. Now, there were arenas like this all over Rome, but in Rome, the city, you have the Circus Maximus, and it could hold up to 300,000 people in it. So very, very large entertainment venue. Theaters were created as well in order to provide drama and music and dance. And then they also had gladiator shows at the Colosseum. And the Colosseum was another building that was created. It was very expensive, very well planned, in order to have these gladiator displays. From dawn to dusk, these contests were held. And the Colosseum could hold 5 or 50,000 people. It also usually contained some sort of gladiator school where slaves were taught how to be gladiators. Those that became gladiators, typically they were slaves or criminals. This was sort of their punishment for whatever crime. And then you also had some that were free volunteers, because this was a way that they could make some money and make some money quickly for their families. But the gladiator shows become very, very popular, and you get some patronage involved that is kind of like when you think like NASCAR today, where every driver has their patrons or their the people that pay for the ads and stuff. It's kind of the same way with gladiators, that they had a patron, somebody who paid for their equipment and paid for their food and their entertainment and their medical crew, that kind of thing. It wasn't just gladiators going up against each other. Sometimes they would have criminals versus wild animals, so they would ship in lions or bears, alligators. There's even accounts of rhinoceroses being brought in. And then sometimes they would also have animal contests between animals themselves, dogs versus bears or whatever. But it was very expensive to capture and ship these animals to Rome. So it was not frequently done, but when it was done, it was very well attended. But the games themselves of the gladiators was a symbol sort of what happens to you if you don't obey your master, that you could be sent to the gladiator ring and probably not die in a very nice way. Well, eventually Augustus dies, but he leaves there's no law of succession, and a law of succession is a rule of who's going to take over after you die. And so there's really no code to follow, but the first 4 that follow him are actually related to him. First off, you have Tiberius, and Tiberius was seen as a very good emperor. He was Augustus's successor. He is his stepson. And so it kind of starts this tradition of being hereditary, that it passes down through the bloodline. The next one is Caligula, and Caligula was seen as very incompetent and cruel. In fact, he appoints his horse as consul, just to show a lack of respect for the Senate. So yeah, he kind of had some issues. Eventually, he will be assassinated by 2 patricians who were in charge of the Roman government. That next is Claudius, and Claudius also was seen as a very good emperor. He was a scholar, so he spent a lot of time looking at scrolls and writings to see what makes a good emperor. Then you have Nero, and Nero was seen as a terrible emperor, very bloodthirsty and violent. In fact, he is suspected of burning down Rome in 64 CE. But he also has a lot of mental issues. He did not want anybody taking his job from him, and so he is going to eliminate any opposition. Well, if it's hereditary, his opposition are going to be his siblings and anybody related to him. And so he kills his mother and he kills his siblings, and he goes on this huge killing spree. He's also very, very extravagant and uses money without thinking about how he's using his money. And so eventually the Roman legion, which is the Roman military, is going to revolt, and he ends up committing suicide because they were going to kill him anyway. They were tracking him down, and he eventually kills himself. Well, since he had killed off all of his relatives, he had no one to take over after him, and so that's going to lead to a civil war. And there's a civil war that breaks out for 27 years. And during this 27 years, you had tons of emperors, all kinds of emperors. In fact, in 1 year, you had 4 different emperors in that 1 year. So it is a lot of chaos going on in Rome at this time. Eventually, you get the era of the 5 good emperors. These good emperors are going to bring about a respect for the ruling class, They cooperate with the Senate rather than butting heads with the Senate. They end arbitrary executions, and arbitrary executions are just where the emperor says, I don't like the way you look at me, so I'm going to have your head chopped off, kind of thing, that I'm going to put you to death. And so arbitrary just means without a reason. So they're going to put an end to executions that happen with no reason, without cause. This is also a time period of a lot of peace and tolerance and diplomacy. So very, very good time for Rome. A lot of building programs are going to be put in place, building aqueducts and ports and bridges. So a lot of growth taking place in Rome. Among those 5 good emperors included Vespasian, who is going to be the one that kind of regains control during his 10-year reign. So he is emperor for 10 years, and he's going to restore the control back to Rome. Trajan, who is going to limit Rome's expansion. Basically, he thinks that it's not good for Rome to expand anymore because it makes it weaker, because there's so much territory to control. And then Hadrian. And Hadrian is going to think that the empire is already overextended, and so he's going to withdraw and reduce Rome's territory. So he takes land, or he's going to withdraw from Mesopotamia, and he's going to fortify the frontiers against the Germans and the Scots. He's going to create a wall in England, limiting the territory that Rome will expand to, and it's called Hadrian's Wall, and it's still there today. But basically, he felt that because Rome was so overextended that there's no strategic reserve, and that makes them vulnerable, and that's going to cause some problems. So after these 5 good emperors, there's going to be a gradual decline, mostly because they create this decline by saying we don't need this much land, and so they begin to slowly shrink Rome back. And then we get Emperor Caracalla, and Emperor Caracalla is going to extend citizenship to all people who live in Roman territory. And this is going to cause some issues as well, just because they don't always agree with this. But there's going to be some chaos and civil war during his time period. There's a test of military strength, because there's multiple people that want the throne and don't think that Caracalla's in charge. There will be invasions by people who see the Romans as becoming weaker. So the Persians come back and are a problem. Some Germanic tribes like the Visigoths are going to cause some problems. Then you have the Huns from Central Asia, led by Attila the Hun. They're going to start attacking, and that causes issues as well. It's just a bad time for Caracalla, because there's plagues, there's a labor shortage, decline in trade and industry, and so in order to keep control, you got to have your army, but your army's dying, and they're leaving you, and they're going to go join other sides, and they're dying in the plagues, and they're dying in the invasions, and all kinds of stuff. So what Caracalla decides to do is he's going to hire Germans, but that's kind of a problem, because these Germans are not Roman, and so they have no understanding of Roman tradition. They have no tie to the Roman Empire or the Roman Emperor, so it's kind of a sketchy situation. Eventually, we will see a restabilization by control and coercion. Diocletian is going to Emperor Diocletian is going to divide the empire into 2 pieces, because he says that makes it easier to govern. So you will have the Eastern and the Western Roman empires. And then you have Constantine, Emperor Constantine, who's going to move the capital of Eastern Roman to Byzantine. Instead of remaining it in Rome, the city, he's going to take it to Byzantine, and the eastern section becomes more important than the western Rome section. And then you have Romulus Augustus, and Romulus Augustus is in charge when Rome is going to be sacked by the Vandals, and the Germanic tribes are going to replace the Western Roman Empire as the most powerful force. But the Eastern Empire is going to carry on, and they carry on the traditions of Rome. But basically, Rome as an empire ceases to exist with Romulus Augustus.